notice this spot and notice where we are. That's the entrance to the water system. That's where we saw it about an hour, 2 hours ago. I don't remember when it was, something like that. Yes, it took us a long time to go through. And this is not the normal thing you might be doing with a group. Let's say a normal group at the City of David is here between an hour and a half and 3 hours. So you already passed that in how much time we've been here. Many groups come here running through the site with or without the water. And as Laura asked me, does the bus pick you up at the bottom? It depends on the driver and depends how, let's say, how strict you are with the driver. Most drivers do not like to stand with their bus at the bottom in Silwan. It's possible. There's even a bus stop, but many of them just say we're not going there, and that's it. And that means you'll need to find another way up. Sometimes they do, and that really helps in the continuation of your day. I'll just say that the site itself offers shuttles with payment back to the top.
Is it across Dan Boutique Hotel?
No.
Is it still there?
No, from here to the top of the site. There are also special shuttles and special occasions from hotels, but that's special. Every day from the bottom back to the top, it's optional. And of course, walking back up is optional. I have to admit that I usually walk up, and every time I offer to my tourists, you can take the shuttle, and they decide to walk with me. But then I usually stop. On the way to make it a little bit to break the walk. So that was one thing. We climbed a little bit up, again, back to the level of the entrance of the water system, and that reminds you that the city walls, we just passed them. Remember, I tried to point, a little bit hard to see over here, but there we saw a portion of the location of the wall, so we just crossed it back into the ancient city from the Iron Age and from the Bronze Age as well. The walls were basically in the same location. But I stopped here for one more thing, and that is David died. Right? Remember? He transferred the kingdom to his son, Solomon. And then we are told something very, very interesting. I'm in 1 Kings, I think it's chapter 1 or chapter 2. Chapter 2, verse 10. And David lied in his deathbed, which means with the forefathers, and he was buried in the city of David. And that's interesting. Why is that interesting? Because burial usually takes place outside the city. And that means that some space in the city, we can assume it should be in the edge and not in the city center, was used as David's tomb. Now I won't do this, but 10 chapters later, Solomon dies. And I can read that he was buried with his father in the city of David. 3 chapters later, Rehoboam died, and he's buried with his forefathers in the city of David. And then so was Aviah, and so was Asa, and so was Yehoshaphat, and I can continue with the kings of David. They are one after the other for the next 10 generations buried in the city of David. Which means there is some spot that is used as a burial of the kings. Where? What?
Outside the wall, because they don't bury inside the wall.
Inside the walls? Well, the interesting thing is we're not really sure if it's inside or outside, but if
you would say.
What? Maybe the kings are allowed. You say maybe the kings are not impure. In as much as we understand the ancient purity laws, there was no difference between any person and any other person, and therefore apparently they were still considered impure, but apparently a designated spot was left aside. Let's let these people pass if you want. A designated spot was left aside for the burial of these kings. But understanding that, that means that the tomb of David and his descendants is in the city of David and not on Mount Zion. You all know Mount Zion?
Yes.
And the church of the Dormition Abbey, and right next to it is a place called David's tomb.
Everybody goes there.
I know everybody goes there. I'm going to skip to a later day in our course and tell you that that tradition as a tomb is not before the Middle Ages, 1,000 years ago or so. Connection with David starts a few centuries earlier, very, very similar to Nebi Samuel, where they talk about Samuel and eventually someone says, oh, it's his tomb. So the same thing happens between the Byzantine and the Crusader period. That's what happens also in David's tomb on Mount Zion. But definitely no one mentions David's tomb there before the Middle Ages. It doesn't mean they do say where it is. Just no one talks about that spot. And understanding this and understanding what I said before, that made a French researcher in the 1870s and 1880s to think of a cool idea. It's half nonsense, but it's a really cool idea. He claimed that the tunnel of Hezekiah made all the twists and turns to avoid passing underneath the king's tomb. A cool idea. That's apparently nonsense, but it's a cool idea. The moment that was announced in the 1880s in Paris, someone very wealthy heard about it, and his name was the Baron of Rothschild. You already heard this guy. And he sent his local emissary in Jerusalem to buy the property above the tunnel. Because understanding that in this area somewhere is David's tomb. 20 years later, in 1913, the Meyuchas family that built their home over there and was sure they're going to be living in quiet and paradise, one day found an archaeologist arriving in their backyard, digging right there, because it's in the area that this tunnel avoids in that loop. And there the archaeologist found two caves, and he pointed at one of them and said, "This is David's tomb." Now, you know why he did that? Because he was supposed to get a salary to find David's tomb, so he can't really say he didn't find it. What he found there are two caves that no one really knows what they are. These caves were destroyed by a Roman period quarry where stones were taken for construction. Until this moment, I have no idea what that place is, but definitely there's something hidden there from earlier times than the Roman quarry. So is it First Temple period or not? I'm sorry, we don't know. But if you want the other option for David's tomb, it's just down this walkway, about 150 meters away. A nice spot where you can sit down in a cave and not really see David's remains, but if you really want to visualize it, it's possible.